So I'm quite happy that I've actually talked after Ken, because quite a lot of the issues are already brought up on the table for Ireland, and these apply for the UK, so it will be easier for you to follow. Well, to set up the scene, I just want to give some of the statistics of the current situation of our forest. In the UK, what I mean is England, Scotland and Wales. We're talking about the three countries together, and they represent on average 13% of the land. We've got more forested, well, up to 17% in Scotland, and 10 and 11% in England and Wales. Half of this is a conifer more or less plantations, and less than half is the broadleaves. And we've got much less than half area of the forest which is in the public forest estate managed by the Forestry Commission, and we've got quite a lot of a private forest. So as been mentioned, and it's so important, forests deliver lots of important ecosystem services, and it could protect, and it's well known to protect soils and waters. It could serve well for biodiversity and cultural and recreational benefits, and of course it delivers timber. In the UK currently we've got 8.5 million tons of softwood and 0.4 million tons hardwood per year, which also links to where we extract most of the timber from. It's obviously from our plantations, which are mostly made of Sitka spruce. And last but not least, forestry is a huge carbon stock, and could make a quite large contribution to carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas mitigation objectives and targets which are already signed up. So to follow on that, just to give you the most recent estimates from the National Forest Inventory and the Biosoil Survey, which has been mentioned by Luca, which we very highly used in the UK to actually come up with a measured carbon stocks in the soil in addition to the forest. Currently, total UK carbon stocks in forests, it represents nearly 1,000 million tons of carbon. And as you could see in the pie chart, up to 74% of that is in the soil. And our peatlands, as the same in Ireland, actually make a quite large contribution to it, which is 11%. As you can see here on the right side, the graph represents the density of carbon between mineral soils in the blue bars and the organic soils. And you can see that the density of carbon is double in organic soils, and the potential to be lost or to waters or to release to the atmosphere is much higher. So what we do on these soils where we've got most of our plantations is very important. How do we protect that, not only the physical environment, but also the carbon? So with the mind of all these increasing benefits and the carbon sequestration, the three countries' governments have committed to increase in forest in them in terms of the land cover. And in England, they're very ambitious, but these are the most latest figures coming from 10 to 12% increase in forest land in England, 17 to 25% of land to be increased in Scotland, and in Wales is again similar from 10 to 13.5%. So this is by the different time scales, but mostly by the middle of the centuries, which is actually a quite ambitious task, especially when you consider the land availability and the competition of land for different benefits and different land uses, including energy. And the drivers behind all these woodland creation initiatives is obviously to maximize the delivery of multiple benefits, water, biodiversity, social from woodlands and forests, but also to better manage of existing woodlands and much more woodlands in active management, so to meet some of the bioenergy perspectives, but also to integrate woodlands with other land uses and make the full benefit of that. And last but not least, the importance for greenhouse gas abatements and climate change mitigations. To touch on the soil distribution in the UK, this is a map showing, well, a simple grouped soil types. The black is the deep peats, and I think the pink is the peaty glaze soil, so it's the organo-mineral soils, which, as you can see, the distribution is mostly in the uplands, in Scotland, in Wales. And this is where our forest, well, the plantation forest has historically been planted on, mainly on either upland organic soils or on a poor podzolized soil, as can be mentioned for Ireland as well. So we've got actually plantation on a quite sensitive soils in terms of nutrients regimes, but also carbon. Well, so some of the native and broadleaf woodland is mostly, of course, in the lowlands and more on more productive or marginal productive soils. As been done in Ireland in the past, the main preparation for planting a forestry, especially the exotic Sitka spruce on the uplands, is being to drain the peatlands and to plow them, and actually to do deep plowing too, to be able to establish the crop, but also to, I mean, there's a certain amount of fertilization has been applied to the soil. So all this combined, it actually could mean a huge impact, which I will show you later with a few examples which we've got. And I also want to emphasize here that forest soils differ from agricultural soils, of course, because they've been left long time not to be disturbed and have well-developed organic layers. They kept their structure, physical structure better. They, of course, have large spatial variability, which we need to make sure we know how to capture their change, different biotic balances, and overall, we could say forestry positive for soils because they are less disturbed than agricultural soils. Again, when we compare to grassland, then that could be another story. Here in this slide, I wanted to mention an overview of the pressures and risks. I know we gathered here to talk about mostly forest management and what are the impacts on that, but it's been mentioned there are many, many other pressures on our soils, and we don't have to forget the natural phenomena which can just before me mentioned is the wind throw, which is a very, very important part in our uplands, but also fires and pests and diseases, which with climate change are expected to increase. And this is exactly linked to the question of putting the right trees in the right place. And this, we need to be very careful of what we do in terms of that. So actually in the future, we could minimize these risks and also provide sustainable forestry in the long term. But there already the atmospheric pollution, because we don't have to forget about that. Well, we know the sulfur deposition has declined significantly, and that pressure is off our soils. I mean, some of our soils, even poor, they recovered. We've noticed a recovery in the UK of some of the soils from sulfur deposition. But there are subsequent risks with release of more dissolved organic carbon through that recovery and so on. So, and especially in some of our upland, very pristine sites where the deposition has been low anyway, we have some evidence that our forests could become sulfur deficient. So in terms of the long-term productivity, we need to bear that in mind. And of course, the nitrogen deposition is there to stay, especially in the UK and south, well, in England, we've got quite a lot of farming, intensive farming and agricultural activities, which next to, in the proximity of Woodland, could actually have a big impact on forest eutrophication, soil eutrophication, and linking to water, water problems. So moving on to the climate change and carbon sequestration, as been mentioned, we've got, through the European initiatives, is towards the land restoration. We've got quite a big drive for land restoration, and in terms of the UK is the forestation, well, more or less restoration, first of all, from degraded peatlands to natural habitats, and planting more forests or replanting on some of the peatlands which are not actually good for restoration. So this is another pressure on our land of how we decide and what do we do with, where do we restore and when do we replant, and how we, in terms of how we do preserve the soil, in addition to provide the other ecosystem services of what is desired from the restoration. And this concerns, again, the peat soils, the peaty, the organomineral soils, and linked to the, directly to the greenhouse gas balance, but also to other ecosystem services. So just wanted to go through those to actually say that there are the pressures, and in addition to forest management, and maybe with the forest management, we could, and careful planting and the right tree for the right place, we will be able to maybe minimize those to a certain level for to be useful and positive for forest, long-term forest management, for forest productivity. So in terms of the coming back to today's forest management practices, is what that actually impacts on the forest soils. We've got the pressure of course, ground preparation. How do you prepare the land, and is the soil sensitive to certain ground preparation? How you deal with that? Through the life cycle of the forest, we've got the impact of thinning, and of course, the biggest impact could come in the harvesting, depending on the best practice you take to do that. In terms of renewable energy and the push towards the drive towards increase of more biofuel, more biomass coming from our woodlands to meet these targets, we've got also pressure on to do more, to get some more brush from our woodlands, and to even in a few years back, we had quite a strong pressure to actually destump, to take the stumps out of at the end of the rotation as well to burn for biofuel. So actually we had to deal very quickly as forest research people to actually act and come up with a guidance to say where is sustainable to do that and where is not. And I'll just mention that in a few moments. So just to highlight what are the 5 main forest management alternatives in the UK forestry is, I've put this diagram going from left to right down the slope of starting with the objectives of more optimizing our forests for biomass production and creating more revenues from that, going down to the intensive even age management, which is where we've got the most land covered in terms of that kind of management, where you've got, again, optimized revenue for timber production, moving down to combined objectives where you want to actually extract all the multiple benefits of forest, but it will generate you obviously less revenues in terms of timber, and going later down to the close to nature forestry, where you want to produce wood by emulating natural processes and cycles. And last but not least, where you don't want to manage, or we don't want to touch these forests to allow development of natural processes without human intervention. So the spreads in the UK with us, of these 5 management options are highlighted in this top graph on the left. You've got the 55% of the forest managed as an intensive even age forestry, and this is, as I mentioned, this is mainly our Sitka spruce plantations. You can see that although we've got a push for renewable forestry, we've got only very small amount of short-duration forestry yet in the UK, because we've got a lot of land competition, and actually this is a new initiative to go ahead. Looking at the right graph here top, this is actually calculated the release of the greenhouse gas from machine operations, if we actually, all the machine operations needed to do the thinning, the cultivation, the harvesting, and actually you could see that increases with the type of management. So the more intensive, the more greenhouse gas you will release from that, but also it's the highest in the harvesting operations, which in every single management options. So this is where we would expect the most release to come. And when we calculated the total carbon sequestration rates for from all these management alternatives, of course, the highest carbon sequestration potential comes with the highly managed forest. And so it's not difficult to convince policymakers that, okay, I mean, and vice versa, for them to be able to actually push towards more planting of conifers as well. Although the wider woodland expansion in the UK is more towards native and broadleaves woodlands. However, all this push from policy actually makes there will be more conifer plantations expansions. So to give you some examples of what could mean the ground preparation impact on the soil, I've just put a table which is actually very nicely done by a colleague of ours who's put it into here his 30 years of experience on the ground, how different preparation techniques could actually influence the soil disturbance in terms of percentage. And as you can see from the top down to the bottom, you could have 2% disturbance where you actually don't do anything on the ground, just you plant by hand, down to nearly 75% disturbing the soils when you actually do the most disturbance, which is trench mounding, drains, you put the drains, you drain the soil, and also you disturb on the top of that. So actually, by managing currently, we've got deep ploughing coming down to a shallow ploughing in terms of policy and guidance move. So basically, we could reduce the rate of, just only by applying this kind of practice, we could reduce the rate by about 20 to 30%, comparing the first and the middle section here, where you got deep plough and a shallow plough. So these are very useful figures to actually starting to quantify what could mean if we put some protection measures, what it could mean, what in quantities, what it could mean in terms of protection of the soils and quantifying it. So I'll just put an example on the right about soil carbon dynamics in a chronosequence studies, which actually quantify that actually impact from ground preparation and forestry, and it comes up that you could lose, this is on a peaty clay soils, 25 to 30% of the carbon when you actually drain the land, and that's under the highest disturbance. Here's an example of soil physical damage due to a wood extraction. So once you plant the forest, obviously, the next stage is how do you extract the wood, and during the thinning operations, and at the end, how you actually clear fell. So, I mean, we've got quite good guidance into place to actually be followed, and these things not to happen, but just to show you, this is an experiment suggesting soil physical damage due to wood extraction of oaks on water glaze soils, and this has been done in the winter and without brush mats, so there is nothing on the surface, and well, you've got a heavy machine going a few times across, and you could see that every single pass increase. The second even pass, 3 passes increase double the root depth in this extraction way. So if protection hasn't been done, it would have been different. But this is an example of how actually physical damage can occur if you don't follow a simple measures. The bottom graph, picture and graph is about soil carbon change due to clay fall of Sitka spruce and peaty clay. Now, the same chronosequence study to emphasize that clear fall could also mean one of the largest carbon loss. Well, if you quantify carbon, I mean, you could quantify nutrients in the same way and so on, well, due to clear felling. And that also depends of how you do extract the wood, of course, what machines do you use, and whether you leave the brush on the soil or not for the follow-on rotation. These are examples of if you, during the rotation, you want to extract, or at the end, you want to extract the brush. We've got a few experiments, long-term, going to suggest in killed forests, not particularly that one, I just want to mention another one, where we've got positive effects of brush removal or negative effects of brush removal. So you could observe the two effects depending on the soil type. We observed that with highly organic soils, the brush removal could be beneficial for the soil because you would not stimulate the mineralization. If you leave the brush on a highly organic soil, you will stimulate mineralization and you will lose the carbon and nutrients. Of course, this will go in the above ground biomass. So you need to do the balance above and below ground to be able to actually look at the overall output of these practices. But if we are preserving the soils, there could be a guidance to actually be soil type driven where you practice that. And we've designed this already for our forest managers. This is 3 graphs of an experiment long term just to suggest Where to start? Well, these are 3 sites on different soil types, and from poorer, Moray is a very poor site, AE is a bit richer, and this is the richer site at Kilda in terms of nutrients and carbon. And there's lots of treatments here going alongside with brush removal, fertilizers, herbicides, but I don't want to bother you with that. The main thing here is if you see the red line along all these graphs, and this is the foliar nitrogen uptake of the trees, you could see that actually they're all going down in no matter of treatment, no matter if you leave brush, no matter if you fertilize. They all go down to the deficient level, and the deficient level, the years they reach that deficient level depends on the soil nutrient status, on the soil quality. So that's actually need to be embedded in decisions for making protection decisions for making, what actually you could do on these soils, on these soils, and for long-term productivity. So it needs to be taken account what you start from, not only what you do at the end. And as I mentioned before, stump harvesting was a push a few years ago, which some private owners in Scotland decided that they could maximize their biomass from their forest, and they started practicing stump harvesting, which actually could really have if it's not done properly on the right place and the right soil, it could have a huge ground damage. It could cause soil infertility, soil acidification, carbon loss, but also this is all linked to waters. It's got sediments leaching down. You got carbon and so on, so you could actually have a phosphorus and have huge problems. So after doing a few experiments on that, we've actually come up with similar results for the brush removal. You need to look at the soil type. You need to look at the sensitivity of soil type to a certain operation, to certain, even if it's drastic damaging the soil, to be able to actually to decide what to do. So some of these experiments given us the clue that you could actually carry on some of the stump harvesting on the browner soils, and that will not damage too much the soil, and even you will leave the soil prepared for the next rotation, but you cannot do it on organic mineral soils because that will be detrimental for the soil, for the waters, and inevitably although we don't know, for the future forest, long-term forest productivity. So how do we protect all that? How we actually manage, how we try to make sure that these risks and pressures are not compromising the soils for sustainable forestry and actually long-term forest productivity, but not only, but delivering all the benefits from forestry. Well, the UK Forestry Standards is the reference standard for sustainable forest management in the UK, and it's actually underpins with all these guidelines, which are, including the forest and soil guidelines, which are separate, but they're all interlinked as well. The soils is very linked with the climate change guidelines, with the water guidelines, and they underpin these standards of good practice. They also promote their basis for regulating and for monitoring the impacts, and also for the basis for the national international reporting. So this is the overarching protection of UK forest soils. And when you come down to a smaller scale, to more sites level or more operational level, then we've got this current guidance for best practice of particular operation. As I just mentioned, we got some brush removal, stump removal. So we had to come up with guidance on site selection for brush removal and also for stump harvesting. And how we deal with that, it was, we split it. We had enough evidence, obviously, we need to go towards the soil type, and then we've got 4 risk areas, ground damage, soil carbon, soil infertility, soil acidification along those soil types, and only when the combined risk of all those 4 comes low, or medium, then, low particularly, then you're allowed to carry on this operation. If the combined risk comes medium, then you need to follow a particular instruction, rules in terms of you need to leave, just an example, you need to leave a particular, more brush on the site, or extract only half of it, or spread it, or just leave it to shed its green, the needles, and then take it out. So if it is medium risk, then you follow this type of instruction, and if it is high risk, you don't you actually lock this land for this type of operation. So this is what is currently under update, and we are actually trying to underpin it with science, of course, and we're doing through some site-specific, so nutrient balances, so to actually look at not only soil impact, but how that means, what that means for overall nutrient balance in terms of above and below ground and carbon. And we're going to carry on that with national mapping of forest nutrient balances, where hopefully we'll be able to say this is the land where you don't do this type of practice, and this is the land where you can do this type of practice, but needs more scientific underpinning to carry on that. And forestry on peat, this is a big issue within the whole of the UK, with a drive for peat restoration, but also with the drive for peat preservation in terms of what is already there. And as we have past guidance for planting, we move from planting forestry from on peat, which is 1 meter deep. Now, current guidelines for protecting the peatland is to plant only forestry, which on the peatlands, which is with a 50 centimeters depth. So this is a huge move, and actually, fortunately, lock quite a lot of the land where you cannot plant. But also, we are looking a lot about how we could look at this land, which is already planted and which is not suitable for restoration, how you could actually replant, and actually you get more timber out of it, for example, and you've got greenhouse gas mitigations. So on this project we've carried out, and which will underpin current guidances, we worked out that if a peatland can support yield class 8, for example, Sitka spruce mixed plantation, maybe with a lodgepole pine, then we could actually replant these deep peatlands, and if not, then we could actually think about restoration measures. So these are huge projects we've done for Wales particularly, and the guidance coming up for Scotland. So if you're interested, there's lots of documents and reports behind that. And the current guidance is going to come out, it's under consultation, and it will come out soon for peatlands and forestry in Scotland. And in addition to all these guidelines, and peatlands protection measures, we've got alternative management practices and initiatives for soil protections. One is the Woodland Carbon Code. I don't know how many you've heard, but we've got these voluntary standards for woodland creation projects in the UK, which makes claims about the carbon they could sequester. So it encouraged more of the private sector to plant more woodland, and they could claim carbon benefits from it. So this is one way where it's already embedded and it works for the last 2 years, and it's a way we feel that it could protect more soils. Of course, soil benefits through new woodland creation and soil rotation forestry, where you actually plant some forests to to slow the runoff of water, to protect soil erosion, and so on. We've got lots more targeted woodland creation for water benefits and for soil benefits. And last but not least, we're moving to less intensive managed practices, such as continuous cover forestry. This is where you come many more times onto the site to extract a little bit of wood, and then you leave the site to regenerate all that through the life cycle. This could mean positive, but also could mean negative, because you could actually make sure that you go into the forest more times than just 1 or 2 times of thinning. But overall, we've got some because of the increase of above ground biodiversity, you've got lots more positive impacts on the soils in terms of carbon and nutrients and biological influences. So these are also initiatives which we think that they will be promoting and they will be protecting soils, although they are not designed to specifically to do that. And finally, everybody knows that we do it right, that we follow these guidelines, how we know that the manager is just doing what he's supposed to do. And as a forest manager in own, a certification is the one way actually where they can ensure that they do carefully and they actually follow the the instructions, and then their long-term management is recognized, because then only through that type of checking up, then they could do that. And certification, although it's voluntary, is signed by most, and involves an inspection of the forest management by independent organizations to check that it passes the international and grid principles of good forest practice and management, but also the national ones, which the UK was, but I won't go towards that because it's a bit late. And some final conclusions, I some because there could be lots more. Of course, we got just mentioned targets for woodland expansion across the UK, drive for develop renewable energy from forestry, drive for peatland restoration and protection. So all these are actually impacting on how we manage and how we protect soils. I could say that no large-scale soil damage in the UK, with the exception of the large impact from historical planting or deep peat. They are localized damage. There could be localized erosion or localized wind throw and so on. But so far, we don't think there is a large-scale damage in the UK. Long-term forest productivity depends quite a lot on soil conditions to start with, and then we need to take that into account before we actually decide how we manage them. UK protects their forest soils by developing specific guidance, as I've showed you, for best practices. And we also got overall soil protection for sustainable forestry by develop soil guidelines under the UK Forestry Standards, and which are controlled by the UK Forest certifications. And last but not least, and very important, as is mentioned, research is needed. Research is ongoing to continue to scientifically underpin all these protection measures we put on soils. And that's what we do. And thank you very much for your patience.